Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a webinar, Taking Care of Yourself While Taking Care of Others. This is provided to the Travelers Aid International community and of partners, as well as any other supporters. Let me introduce myself in a second, but welcome, and let's get started. So my name is Jason Miller. I'll talk about myself a little bit more in a minute. I am the CEO at Families Forward Philadelphia, which is also known as Travelers Aid Society of Philadelphia. And I just want to welcome everyone to this webinar. If you haven't talked about self-care in a little while, I invite, or if you have thought about it recently, I'd invite you to, for the next 45 minutes, to sit back and think a little bit about how you handle these things, how you manage, how you provide yourself self-care, how your agency provides you self-care. So what I want you to do is get out a piece of paper, and I want you to jot down some ideas. You'll be able to see this PowerPoint at a later point in time to refer back to it, but make sure you get out that piece of paper with a pencil or pen and jot down some of these ideas, and I might have a couple of things for you to do along the way. So first off, greetings, Families Forward Philadelphia. So special that we get to do this today with you. Whatever you're doing right now, please note that it's really good and you're doing the best you can. And thank you for being here today. So here's a couple of things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about self-care, reflections for you, reflections about your team, and reflections about your organization. So over the next 45 to 60 minutes, I want you to do a couple things as you're thinking about this for yourself. The first one is, please be kind. There are no judgments. We all mess up with this. We all do well with it. Other people do well. Other people mess up with it. Make sure that you're being kind to yourself when you're thinking about self-care. As you're being kind, please be kind to yourself, your team, and your organization, and also to the people that you help. The next one is be open. Make sure that you are open to these ideas if they're new or if you've heard them before. We have to constantly be working at this as we are helpers and as we get into this space. Make sure you remain open to learning. Also be open to what you struggle with and what you do well. And then finally, enjoy the process. A career-long process of understanding how you help people and how you help yourself. So it is really this process. You got to look at it as a process, the way you did it when you were 20, 30, 40, 50 years of age within your organization, how you led, how you did case management, how you help travelers. All these things change throughout your career. So make sure you enjoy this process. So a couple things about me. First off that you need to know is, and this gives you a frame of reference, I have over 20 years experience as a social worker. I claim to be a social worker. I'm social work trained. The core values of social work really shape who I am as a direct practitioner as well as a leader. And this becomes important as I move through this this webinar. A couple things about being a social worker. I believe that people are all worthy of all the services that we provide, very important. And I also believe that an organization has the ability and the right and the space to provide staff which as much care as possible, giving people every opportunity with trainings, giving them every opportunity to do well within their jobs. But it also is important that they're able to care for themselves, and staff and leadership at the organization have to do the same. So important to note, I am a social worker, and it shapes what I'm about to say. The next one is that I am Mennonite. For those of you that don't know what Mennonites are, we're close to the Amish folks as a religious group. It would be a Christian a group, but some unique things about the Mennonite that have shaped me. I grew up in northern Indiana in a Mennonite community. And a couple of things I take away from it. We are very big on pacifism. We're very big on service to others. So, of course, I became a social worker, but that service to others is very important to understand. And that service also gets translated out into community and how community takes care of each other. And let me be clear about that. How a community takes care of each other is through mutual aid. And that mutual aid is really this space that I want to think about for self-care. It is about you and what you do, but it is also that mutual aid that others around you can help you with as well. So it's very important for you to understand that I'm a social worker and that I'm a Mennonite. And then finally, I mentioned this earlier, I have 20 years experience. This 20 years experience becomes very important to from a place of seeing lots of folks that do very well with self-care and lots of folks that struggle mightily with self-care. Lots of organizations that do well with it, lots of organizations that don't do so well with it. But the other thing with that experience is I have a lot of stories. And I'm a storyteller, and I'll probably tell a lot of stories during this webinar. Those stories become important for a variety of reasons because they give me a reference point for what works and what doesn't work for myself and for organizations, for you as well. So bear with me as I tell some stories because it's very important to acknowledge that. And then, like I said earlier, again, storyteller within this experience. So of course, I'm going to start off with a story. One of my first jobs, I was working with kids in their homes with their families for behavioral health issues. And I got into a situation where police were involved with a 13-year-old who was having a behavioral health issue. And the police handled it. I was there, and I didn't like how they handled it. It impacted me a great deal. I went home. I struggled with it for about 2 or 3 days. If you wanted to put a title to it, I was probably traumatized a little bit about how they handled it and my lack of intervention. I was, 22 years old, had never seen anything quite like that. And I took that to my supervisor, and my supervisor was very good at what they did, and they let me talk about it. They let me process it. And I was able to release that. Now, here's the deal. Within self-care, there's a really good chance that if you don't get to release that, what happens? Well, it builds up to the next situation and the next situation and the next situation. And that's happened to me before, but in that situation, I was able to release it and keep working with the family and keep talking about it to my supervisor. And I felt supported by my organization that I was working in. And that really shaped my thinking about how self-care is so important, but how also an agency plays such a key role in staff member self-care as well. So let's define some things. So without that piece of paper, spend a few minutes as I'm talking here on thinking about how you take care of yourself. Can be good, can be not so good, cannot be great, can be great. What are the ways that you take care of yourself? What are the things that you do? And this is the traditional way of thinking about self-care. What are those things? So please jot down some ideas. I'll give you a moment to do that. All right, you've had a little bit of time. Hopefully you have some things that you have written down, but let's talk about self-care for a minute. So this is coming from some specific sources, a book that I'll mention at the end about trauma-informed care and self-care, but I took this quote from that book. So anyone who interacts with the suffering, pain, and crisis of the other, it is an approach that applies equally whether that trauma we encounter is glaring or subtle, sudden or prolonged, isolated or recurring, widely recognized or barely perceived. So here's the deal, everyone. If you're listening to this, you're most likely a helper. What I mean by that is you help written right on your forehead. And doesn't mean you need help. It means that everyone around you asks for help. And that can be in your personal life, that can be in your professional life, it can be in many different settings. And that help starts to add up. You don't necessarily think about yourself, you only think about helping others. And that's the deal. This definition is really, it's glaring and it's subtle, sudden or prolonged, isolated or recurring, widely recognized or barely perceived. And that's the space. As you move in and out of your life, you're going to experience these spaces that can be traumatic, that can be painful. You're meeting people where they are in their crisis. And that's a big, big deal because you're willing to help because of your job or based on who you are. It becomes very important that you find ways to take care of yourself as well. So self-care and trauma. Got to link these because I think it's very important too. And this comes from the book I'll talk about at the end as well. Our stewardship involves, but it's not limited to, our intention in choosing the work we do, our philosophy of what it means to help others, the tone our caregiving takes, and our daily decisions about how we live our life. Just think about that a second. Go back to the list you just made. You're intentionally choosing to do the work. It has to do with your philosophy on how the work needs to be done and why you help others. It's the tone that you take from day to day. And look, frankly, that can change from day to day. But you're doing the work that you want to be doing and you're doing it the way that you want to be doing it. And now, look, the daily decisions, those things shape our lives. So if you think about it, we meet people where they are in their worst moment. Sometimes we don't always get to see them in their best moment. That takes a toll. And it's very important for you to think through that or find the space to care for yourself. Because what we end up doing is we don't always think about all the space that causes for us over a long period of time. Traumatic experience, crisis, crisis, crisis. How do you get out of that pattern? So, trauma exposure and response. We each have different ones with this. So think about this. The first one is your personal dynamics. This is who you are as an individual. Then that fits into organizational tendency. So think about it. How does your organization respond? Who's your supervisor? Who's your leader? Who's your board of directors? Who's your team? How do they respond to crisis? How do they respond to traumatic experiences? So this is a multifaceted role within the place that you're doing the work. So there's the individual, there's the organizational, and now finally you have the societal. So this is a macro view. So these are some of the big things that you can think about, like poverty, like folks that are unworthy of care for a variety of reasons. This is the big thing. So if you think, how do these three interact for you? The personal dynamics based on who you are, and the organizational tendencies based on where you work, and then how does that fit into society? And look, we are all doing this every single day, whether we like to think about it or not, whether we think it's just interpersonal or whether we think it's an organizational issue or whether you think it's a societal issue. It is all three of them at all times. So here's what ends up occurring. You move into these places and these responses that all of you have. And I just want you to think about this. The first one is, it's a sense that one cannot do enough. And if you're moving in this space, you move towards burnout or you move towards a traumatized place of action. So a sense that you can't do enough. So just think about that. Come into work every single day, you know the work's still going to be there, and you can't do enough. And you start to just spin your legs. You just can't quite get there. Here's another one. You become hyper vigilant. What I mean by that is you start to become a little bit vigilant about the work that you say yes to, that you say no to. Nothing wrong with that. But the normal things that you would normally take on, your energy level, you begin to think that people are out to get you. You begin to start working from a place of, I really don't trust anyone. And that becomes a really hard space to do the work. Now, and that can translate into your organization, and that can also translate into how you participants, how you view the recipients of your services. And that hypervigilance sets you off in a place that can be very tough to get out of. So next one, this is how it gets impacted, diminished creativity. What you used to do, what you used to be creative with, maybe you have a pattern now and it's working, but what we come into work to do every single day is problem solve. The big things, the small things, all of that. And all of a sudden, you really don't want to be creative. You can't think through it. It's just diminished. And so the services struggle, and those around you within your problem solving struggle as well. The next one is inability to embrace complexity. We all know that we live and work in spaces that are enormously complex, and the interpersonal dynamics that occur within all of that is enormously complex. And so when you start moving through the trauma place and when you start moving to a place of being burnout, not providing self-care, you end up not being able to deal with that complexity. Maybe the way you did 5 years ago or 3 years ago, and now you're in a space of just dealing with these things in a real way of simplicity. And that becomes very tough because you're missing the bigger picture. You're missing people's larger stories. So embracing that complexity becomes very difficult. The next one would be minimizing. So at this time, you all of a sudden are like, no big deal. I'm just gonna, do this. I'm gonna do that. That interaction that I just had didn't matter. I'm starting to feel burnout. I'm starting to really fit in the space of like, that wasn't that big a deal. And you just let it go. Nothing wrong with letting things go, but at the same time, some of these things have to be dealt with. And as you continue to minimize and push them back further and further, you're really not dealing with the issues in the way that they need to be dealt with. We've all been here before: chronic exhaustion, physical ailments. For some people, this is how burnout and lack of self-care come out. You end up, being just exhausted. And we're not always all good at taking our personal time, our sick time. And so we end up really, they start coming out in physical ailments. If we're not taking care of ourselves, how can we take care of others, right? And so it really becomes this space of struggle to get out of bed. It comes out of this space of like to actually physically do the work. Now, been here before, the inability to listen, deliberate, and this can also come back to avoidance. And I'm not talking about your hard client that is just hard to deal with. I'm talking about, the folks that are fairly simple that you normally would deal with in the ways that, would knock it out of the park, right? Well, now we're talking about the normal things that you do. You're just not paying attention. You're just not able to deliberate, and you end up avoiding any space to problem solve. That is when you are burning out and you're not taking care of it. Now this is the dissociative moment. This is more extreme. Let me be clear about that. But this is where you remove yourself and really sit and like that. I didn't do that. I'm not participating. That is them. That is the organization. That is the people I'm supervising. You're just able to disconnect in the way that's not healthy, and it's not good for the work. And you sit in that moment and are like, I'm not involved in that. And when you're doing that, everybody struggles, especially the service that participants are receiving. Now you keep moving through these. The next one is sense of persecution. So now you have a situation where you're feeling persecuted, and we've probably all been there at a bad organization or with a leader that struggles. You feel persecuted. Some of that is real, but when you're feeling burnout or not taking care of yourself, this becomes very much out in front. You live in a space of martyrdom. You live in a space of everyone's out to get you, and that ends up helping no one. If you're in this space, you've got to really like take a step back and try to figure out how you get out of that, because this will definitely impact the services that you provide. Now, next one, and this is a big one I have because for a variety of reasons, but guilt. When you're feeling guilty, it just absolutely just locks you into that space, and it's really hard to get out. I had a really good therapist tell me one time that guilt is the least effective thing to feel because it's not a feeling. It is a place of paralysis where you just are. You've got to move the guilt to a real feeling, which is anger, which is happiness, which is something else. You've got to move it to a space where you mourn. You've got to move it to something so you can work on it. Guilt cannot be worked on because you can't get past it. And that's a very important acknowledgement that, because lots of folks in our society come from a Puritan place, a Puritan belief that guilt is your penance, maybe a religious place or, some other space. This guilt really gets you down and it's really hard to get out. So if you are currently in this space, you've got to talk to someone, therapist, you got to talk to your supervisor, and you got to move past this because guilt is absolutely crushing to you being able to take care of yourself. Next one is fear. Some of this is normal when working with folks. Some of our jobs are more dangerous than others for a variety of reasons. But fear and when you're talking about self-care is the normal stuff. It's the normal stuff of building relationships, supervising people, doing the normal things within your job. You're all of a sudden fearful from, this could be from making a mistake, or this could be from, you've been chastised a lot. You just can't get to a space that you're operating with a sense of freedom, but it ends up being fearful. And again, if you're in this space, how do you move out of it? Next one is anger and cynicism. I've seen this in a lot of organizations. I see this oftentimes working in organizations where people don't believe in the organization, they just do the work. And when you do the work, it is simply like, look, I work 9 to 5 and then I go home. And that's an okay boundary, but the way they're saying it, the way the action is I don't owe anything to anyone. I'm just here to do a series of checklists. I'm here to work with these folks, and then I'm going to move on. Now, in my place, that is cynicism to a point of the agency's not benefiting from that. And secondly, the folks that are receiving the services, they don't benefit from that either. And when you are in a cynical place, then you move it to anger, and now you're mad. And oftentimes that anger gets pointed at the wrong things. It gets pointed at participants. It gets pointed at crisis. It gets pointed at each other when you're missing the real things that it needs to be pointed at. That could be bad leadership at an organization. That could be organizational culture. It's got to be at the space to be able to feel safe and really name that. And look, this is one where we all end up at one point in time, and it's a matter of how you get out of it. Inability to empathize and numbing. And look, this one's important because if you end up in this space, it becomes very difficult to get out. And being able to empathize with people's situations is what we all do. We're not in their situation, but we're able to empathize and understand based on them telling us. And if you can't do that, you won't be able to help in the way that you need to. And then that leads to numbing, where you're just like, oh, here's another person. I just heard this story last week. Oh, here's another person, same story. And you just treat everybody the same. And look, frankly speaking, we deal with people. Whatever your job is, we work with people. And if you're numb, it becomes very difficult for you to provide good services. On the other side of that, if you're numb, you're really not feeling the work. It's not giving you the benefit. And that becomes an issue as too. And you got to think about how you're caring for yourself. Now, this is a big one, specifically in our country, substance use. And I'm not talking about someone that, moves to a space of they can't function because of substance use. I'm talking about you still function, but you're using it as a crutch to get through your job, to get through that space. Look, letting go is a good thing. But there are moments where this will move to a space where it is impacting your job. And that's any substance. And yes, I'm going to pick on you coffee drinkers for a second. Smoking, drinking, other drugs, all of these things really can impact the way services are provided, but ultimately it can impact how you do the work and also how you handle yourself when you're at work, as well as in your personal life. And so just think through this. It's everything from the happy hours, nothing wrong with those, but at the same time, is it causing you issues, all the way to, are you blanketing and really not thinking about the work and covering it up with substance use? So just, again, remember what I said at the beginning, there's no blame with this or anything like that. And I don't want anyone to get defensive. It's a space where I've used substances in order to get through hard situations. Friday night, I'm going to do this, and because I've had a long week. We all do it, but it's a question of how that helps your self-care. So be thinking through that. Next one is grandiosity, an inflated sense of importance related to one's work. So we've all said this before. If I leave, the whole place is going to fall apart. That may be true for some of us, but overall, let me just hear this out. The work will continue. And I think a lot of people are burnt out in this space because they're protectors. They want to say that if I go, the work won't be done. And what they're actually saying is the work won't be done in the same way. And that's perfectly okay. But just think through this one. If you're in this space, this place of grandiosity, you are important. There's no doubt about that. At the same time, if you're doing it with a chip on your shoulder, you're not doing anybody any good. And that grandiosity is really important to think through. The place will continue without you, but are you at your best doing the work to do the work? That's the question. And then feeling helpless and hopeless. And, again, we've all been in this space, hard situations, situations that continue on. And when you get in this space, how do you get out of it? That's the question. So, a couple of things to think about. Those were a list of things that the book brings up that you have a chance to think about that we all move in and out of. Some of we handle better, some of them, because of our personality, we really don't experience them in every single way, but some of us experience all of them. And the question is like, how do you get out of it? So I have some ideas for some new ways to practice. First off, you have personal control. What I mean by that is you do have a choice in how you handle these things. So it becomes very important if you look at your list that you drew up at the beginning of this, you have control over all of those. So when you're thinking about that personal control, how do you do that? Next one is pursuit of personal meaningful tasks. So what are the things? This is your typical thing of self-care. What are the things that give you hope, that give you a space of rejuvenation, so you can do the things that really give you meaning in life? Healthy lifestyle choices, again, as we think about self-care, what are those spaces? For me, I run because it's where I do my best thinking. I process it. Also makes me tired, and so I'm able to separate from work in that time. And then social supports, who's around you. So here's some things to think about, and I'm gonna this will be both for you as well as your teams to think about. So first one is, how do you create space for inquiry? What I mean by that, there's an action here. Before starting your workday, take a moment to stop in your tracks and ask yourself, why am I doing what I'm doing? After you hear your answer, remind yourself gently that you are making a choice to do this work. Take a deep breath. Breathe in both the responsibility and the freedom in this acknowledgement. So just think this one through for a second. You are choosing to do this work. You also get to choose how you do it. And so it's a question of, that's a responsibility as well as a freedom in doing it that way. Try that the next time you're feeling some way. Next one is focus. Think of a challenging work situation. Write down 3 things that make it challenging. Write down 3 things that you appreciate about it. 3 things that make it a challenge, 3 things that you appreciate about it. Look at your list and ask yourself, where am I more likely to focus and why? And this is a real skill one, I would say, because oftentimes this will change as you get better at this one. Why are you focusing on this versus that? Why are you focusing on this one and not that one? And do you just focus on the challenges, or do you just focus on what you appreciate about it? And just give that a shot over a couple-week period and see if that changes some of your approach to the work. Building passion and community. So this one is how you ask for support in others. Build a microculture of support. I really like that word, microculture, because it's a chance to really surround yourself with like-minded folks. That could be 1 person or 10 people, whatever, for however you handle the social situations, but they are the folks that support. So think about this within the action. Identify the members of your microculture. To what degree do they nurture hopefulness, accountability, and integrity? So that's hopefulness, accountability, and integrity. Think about whether you could use stronger role models in any of these areas. Now, that's not a strike against the people that you're working with right now, or you're with. This could be people at work. This could be in your own private life. But who's pushing you? Who are those role models that really push you both in observation, in discussion, as well as them asking you to do something a little bit differently? So who are you with that nurtures hopefulness, accountability, and integrity? Compassion with myself and others. So here's the action with this one. Call a time when you were particularly hard on yourself. Now I'm going to stop here. This is me. I do this all the time, from little interactions to big interactions, to how I present things, to how I talk about things. I'm very hard on myself. Some people know that, some people don't, but very hard on myself. So ask yourself what your deepest fear was at that time. Was it failure? Was it that you said something in an incorrect way? Was it that you misled someone? What's your deepest fear? Close your eyes and replay the situation in your mind, imagining how you could have responded to yourself more compassionately. Now, side note with this one, we are only human. We're going to mess up. You're going to mess up a lot. It's okay. You're going to get in social situations that didn't go the way you planned them. You're going to get in presentations. You're going to do things at work. You're going to work with participants in a way that you want. But that's how we learn. And the space that we struggle with, and this is very true, is how we treat ourselves with more compassion. There's a couple things I want you to think about today, but this one becomes so important. You've got to give yourself the grace and compassion to be able to say, oh, I messed that up. Don't take yourself so seriously, and then move to the next thing. Okay. So next one is finding balance. So the action, there's two of them here, is identify one thing you would love to incorporate in your workday, but are certain you could not try. Now try everything in your power to make that aspiration a reality. But these are little things, these are big things. So this could be like making sure uh, you know, do something like go to another um, staff member and say hi. This could be eating lunch. This could be going for a walk for 5 minutes. You may think that's impossible because you can't get away, but make it happen. Try it. Do it. You'll feel better, I guarantee. But how do you do that? You got to decide what it is. And I recommend something small and then building into something bigger. The other action one, and this is one I use a lot. Every single day, think of one person you are grateful to and tell that person so. So since the pandemic hit back in March, I've been spending a lot of time on Friday, setting aside an hour to just thank and acknowledge people. People I may not have talked to in a while, people that I may not have seen in a while, or someone that I've interacted with recently, and I just send them an email message and tell them how grateful and appreciative I am for their work. I also do this in my personal life. And I have to say something with this one. It makes me feel way better than I think the even note gets to. The note is good. You get a lot of responses back that people appreciate, but I have to say it does something for me when I do that. It's a set aside time, and it just acknowledges people. And look, let's be clear, people want to be acknowledged. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The next one is center yourself daily. So at the end of your day, before sleep overtakes you, ask yourself, what can I put down? What am I ready to be done with? What don't I need to carry with me for another day? Put it down. Don't pick it up again the next day. Let it go. And you're probably chuckling at this one because it's not always easy to do. I'm not talking about putting the crisis down. I'm talking about something, a relationship, um, a bad situation that you were dealing with that you want to move away from, some grief that you have. Put it down, put it back. What can you do about it tomorrow? You don't have to. You can deal with it another day. How do you move past that? So remember, everyone, our work is helping people. Just think about that for a second. Look at your list. Our work is helping people. Now, what's the deal with that? That is some of the hardest things that you can do. It's not like working with something that you build. It's not like working with something that you can see the finished product. Most of the time, the work that we do is in crisis. It's when people are at their lowest point. It's when they're at their neediest. And we don't always see the impact we have on people. If we saw more of that impact, and that's no one's fault, we might be able to say, this is why I do the work. This is why I enjoy doing the work. The deal is that our work is often hidden, number one, so it's not as appreciated. And secondly, it's often we don't see the results in the immediate, and that impacts us because we're helping people. So remember what I said earlier, you have help written right across your forehead. Again, remember, not because you need help, because you offer help. And I guarantee you, most of you walk around, whether at work or not, and people ask you for help. In your personal lives, people ask you for help. Because of that, that is a heavy burden to carry. Just slow down and think about that for a second. If you're a helper no matter where you are. And because of that, we get a lot of pride and joy from that, but that can also be very taxing. I can say that about myself. Oftentimes, the help I offer doesn't stop when I leave work. And I can often not focus on myself. And I should focus on myself. I should say how I'm doing, what that looks like. But guess what? I like to do that for other people. When do I turn that off and focus on myself? That's really what the self-care that we're talking about. So here's a couple ideas for your organization and you. How we organize ourselves matters a great deal. It matters more than we like to acknowledge. So I want you to think about a couple things. First off, in the nonprofit world where most of you are working, or in the government world, we make things scarce. We make things scarce from a place that we don't believe that there's a lot of money. And there's some truth to that, right? So we fight over it. We believe that resources and services are scarce, so we treat it that way. We hold back and say, like, this person gets that, this family gets this. It's very scarce. But all of that is true. But something I want you to think about is people don't have to be scarce. The community and mutual aid that we provide to each other as organizations, as team members, as fellow coworkers does not have to be scarce. And I encourage you, part of self-care is that it's asking others for help and them offering that help. And it doesn't have to be scarce. Scarcity doesn't have to translate into all things that we do. And it shouldn't. It should be abundant. We should come from a place of understanding that this work is difficult, it's hard, we are going to burn out, but we need to take care of each other, and that responsibility is a mutual aid to each other. So, I already mentioned a couple of these. What do we owe to each other within this work? First off is connection, an acknowledgement that the work is hard, an acknowledgement that it's going to go up and down based on where you are with your life, an acknowledgement that we need to connect to each other to get through it, to understand it, to learn from each other. The next one is that scarcity idea, mutual aid. Mutual aid is often looked at in specific ways as a community taking care of each other, and I think it's the same way in a nonprofit, in a government organization. That mutual aid needs to be extended to each other, that grace of this is difficult, this is hard, how are you doing? Oh, you need a day off? Cool. You need to take some time off? Great. I'm going to help you with this task. And look, because we make it scarce, we end up looking just and living on our own island. And we need to get off that island and work with each other. Collectively, we can do it, but alone, you will burn out. And that's a very important one. We have community. We need to think about we're building that community. And look, these social issues that we face, these big issues within our society that our organizations face, that we're trying to solve, that we're trying to work on, we can't do them by ourselves. If you're on that island by yourself, you're going to burn out. Just remember that. So collectively, how do we work on it together? And look, let me be clear on something. I've been in enough organizations to know that some places that getting off that island and working with each other is easier said than done. Some of these organizations are set up that way. How do you break that down? If you're a supervisor, how do you break that down with your team? If you're running an organization, how do you break it down so collectively we're doing it together? And then support and acknowledgement should not be scarce. I say it as a bit of um, a novelty to be able to say, I acknowledge people. I tell them, great job, all of that. This should not be scarce. We should expect it from each other. We should do it for others, and people should give that back. It really is that space. When we get into a crisis, we should acknowledge that there's trauma that potentially happened, and how do we move past that? How do we get into the space to say, that this should not be scarce? All right, so a couple things I want to talk about acknowledgement. The world is full of people who deserve to be acknowledged. Very, very important, and it's so true. I think we do this work and we end up thinking about our own little space. Nothing wrong with that, but who else is doing the work well? Who else is impacting us? Because there's other people impacting us, and they should be acknowledged. Couple of things about acknowledgement. Recognizing good work leads to high energy, great feelings, high quality performance, and terrific results. That acknowledgement becomes very big. Not acknowledging good work causes lethargy, resentment, sorrow, and withdrawal. This becomes a space for your organizations and teams to think about. When you start acknowledging people and thanking them and saying great job, and really like noticing the little things people do, the hidden things people do, the big things people do, you also start to think about workloads. And those workloads, should they be lessened? Should they be changed? And that becomes very important as you're listening to people, because it's not just acknowledging them, it's also that you're hearing what they're saying. So make sure you work at that. Acknowledgement is also truthful, heartfelt, and deserved acknowledgments always make a difference, sometimes a profound one in a person's life and work. So as you get off that island and you start collectively working together, this acknowledgement becomes really important. And you do not know how other people see you, number one, and you also don't know the impact that you can have on them. Um, I have the honor of teaching grad level students at a social work school. I've done it for about a decade. And every once in a while, I get a note from one of them in the mail or via email, just thanking me for how I taught, that experience we had together. And, it's one of those things that I don't take for granted. I save a lot of them because when life gets hard, you like to read them. But there's another space there of like, you just don't know how it impacts people. And I do that same thing with other folks, giving that acknowledgement back, because you just don't know how you impact people. You don't know what good or bad week they're having. And then longer term, that impact becomes so important. And also acknowledgement improves the emotional and physical health of the giver and the receiver. I mentioned this earlier. The giver and the receiver benefit from that acknowledgement. And again, we all acknowledge this work is hard, right? But if you can give the giver, the receiver back and forth, you start to create a culture of acknowledgement that really pays off. All right, so a couple things I want you to think about. Since the pandemic hit across the country, specifically the United States, we have moved to doing things a lot more online, and self-care in these situations becomes very important, and we're working in different ways with each other. So I wanted to throw out a couple ideas for you to think about. Um, so first one is, what should we require of each other online? So three places: respect time. So if you say it's going to be a 60-minute meeting, keep it to a 60-minute. If you're going to go over for some reason, make sure you tell people that. Make sure you have that conversation. And obviously, if it's an authentic conversation that's really going, people will engage in that. Next one is, everybody is welcome. So oftentimes we are in people's homes, if you think of it that way, online, and there's other people living in that home, including animals, pets, other kids, family members, whoever, whatever the household makeup is. And from time to time, you're going to have to welcome random folks onto the screen. Don't treat that as the end of the day. Don't treat that as a way to end. Just welcome them. Just say it is what it is. Oftentimes we live in this space of it trying to be perfect, and people are not at work in the same way. So make sure you welcome everyone. And then use of technology. It's different for everyone, and it means something different for everyone. So just acknowledge that. Say that some people's Wi-Fi is better than others. Some people's understanding of what the technology can do and can't do. Offer help with each other, and just say we're doing the best we can. This is where, both of my kids right now are in online learning at home, and every single day is different. They're still learning how to use the technology, how to use the mute button, how to use the video screen, how to use the chat, how to use the different features of it. And they both handle that very differently. Parents handle that differently. So just acknowledge that with different age groups, different populations, the technology means something different. The second one for self-care online is how we create safety with each other. So creating a space where people feel culturally, emotionally, and physically safe. Now, I'm going to say this one up front, that this is still evolving for myself, how you actually go about doing this. I know what it looks like when you do it in a interpersonal and physical way within a room, within a meeting space, within a classroom. I know what that looks like. But online, I'm still figuring that out, and I'd be the first one to say that. So first one, what's the comfort level with technology? So that's going to impact, do you have your screen on or off? And what's that mean if it's off? What's that mean if it's on? Do you give people breaks? So like physical needs, making sure that they have an opportunity to go to the bathroom. So be really blunt. what the data is showing is that you really start losing people after 60 minutes. So how do you mix it up? If you're going to have a meeting longer than 60 minutes, how do you make sure that people are having their physical needs taken care of? Do you let them, or do you create that space where they can turn off their cameras for a few minutes? It's hard being online and engaging each other with these. Um, and then another idea is having a check-in for people. This could be everything from where's your mood to how are you doing, all the way to a success and challenge for the week. Just an opportunity to check in with each other. With a lot of this technology, you can do it one-on-one in small groups. You can do it as a group, but that check-in becomes important. Another idea for self-care online is how do you build trustworthiness, providing full and accurate information about what's happening, what's likely to happen. So that's an example of making sure you set out an agenda, making sure that people understand what you're talking about, what's the point of the meeting. And look, let's be frank, we aren't always too good at that with physical meetings in person. So now is a chance, if you struggled with that, to change that, take care of folks, and really try to say, this is what the meeting's about, this is what we're going to stick to. And if you deviate at all, there might be a reason for that. Ask for another meeting, have another chance to look at that. We also know that interpersonal dynamics happen in these meetings, and how is that different or the same than a physical meeting? So make sure you understand to center and calm yourself, and then share what is easy and what is hard about being online. So choice and control, I mentioned a couple of these already, but just keep thinking about it. Individuals are treated with dignity and have choice and control over how they participate. So first one, think through, if you haven't done this yet, is it mandatory to have your video on? Can participants turn them off? Can staff members turn them off? And if that is the case, then are they listening? How are they engaging? All of those things. And look, we got to think how to do all of this in a new and different way. And then the last one is there's multiple ways to engage, and that's very true. There's chats, there's polls, there's ways to check in beyond just a video. And I want to say with this one, it also is a question of, does everything have to be by video? The video conference can exhaust folks. So you should also think through, should you use a teleconference on the phone? Are there other, technologies that you can use to engage people in different ways? And you know your team, the folks that you're working with, to think that through. And what you're trying to do in the meeting is really trying to collaborate. If you're not collaborating, then that self-care is going to go down and people are going to struggle. So, and then if you struggled with this, this is one way to think about how you hone in and what you're working on. How do you share power and help build relationships with each other in this new way? You know what it looked like when you did it in a physical meeting, when you did it in an in-person meeting. Now you're doing it online. So it's different. So what are some ways that you share that power and you build those relationships? So that's hard. Being online is difficult. So how do you go about doing this? So examples of this: do activities, not just tasks. So if you're just doing check-ins and you're just checking off the list of tasks, people are going to struggle. Are there other activities that you can do to get people to connect to each other? Doesn't mean it's every time, but how do you go about doing that? I heard someone recently say they're online about 8 hours a day. It's just talking about tasks. It's just planning. That's a lot. That's going to burn people out. How long can someone sustain like that? Are there other activities that you can do? Can you log off? Can there other ways to do that? And then open the ways to connect. There are other ways to connect beyond just being online. So what ways can you do that? The things you're trying to work on is, how do you empower people in this new way of operating online, other ways, and then building on the strengths of your team, building on the strengths of your organization. Remember, you have a shared mission and a shared history, and you get to build a new way to operate with each other. For example, I know one of the things that used to happen to me is I would be stressed out from getting from meeting to meeting. I might have to physically get there. Transportation was delayed, or a car was in traffic, or a train was delayed. Now we can just show up, right? And so that's good and bad. It's good from a place of there's no transportation issues, and you just show up, and that access is quite remarkable. And so how do you build on that? How do you get people's attention, right? But you only have them for about 60 minutes before they start getting tired. So how do you manage that? So another one with self-care for being online is how do you create culture, humility, and responsiveness? We have a lot going on in our society right now, the Black Lives Matter movement, and then just the way our federal government is being run right now. So understand that that causes people a lot of stress, a lot of issues for a variety of reasons. So recognize difference in how specific social and cultural groups may experience reaction to and recover from trauma. So remember what I said earlier about how you handle self-care. It's also how your team is responding as well. Connect each other to support and resources that meet their unique social and cultural needs. So a couple pointers with this: ask and never assume. Very important. Ask someone to explain. Don't assume you understand. Their experience is different than yours. Access to technology and internet can be frustrating, can mean different things to different people, different age groups. Make sure you get in that conversation. Name and challenge bias and unhealthy dynamics. Now, we struggled with that in person. How are you going to do it online? Maybe there's a space to do that. Just continue to, if you get in situations where people are being not so nice to each other, there's bias, there's dynamics, now's the time to talk about them. Now is the chance to do that. And then finally, embrace difference. Difference is a good thing, but it can only happen if there's safety and trustworthiness. If you can build that, you can get at the differences. People should be different. It's a good thing. Don't run away from it. Embrace it. But how do you deal with it as it comes up? So thank you very much. I want you to take out that piece of paper again and just jot down a couple ideas that you took away from this. And as you're doing that, I just want you to know that, thank you so much for being here. I know it was about 50 minutes of being able to think about yourself, which we're not always so good at. But just remember this: be kind to yourself. Be kind from a place of understanding that this work is hard. It can be traumatic. It can burn you out. But find those spaces to do better every single day. Be kind to yourself. Give yourself that grace. Thank you for the opportunity for me to talk to you. If you like any of the resources, these are the places that the references that the training came from. I highly recommend the first book, and then the two other. Actually, I recommend all of these. So if you have access to them, please pick them up. The books push much further than what I did. If you have any questions, my email is at the front. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and for all that you do. And just remember, be kind to yourself and take care of yourself. Thank you.